everybody, it's Courtney. Today I'm going to be creating a one-layer scene with the Caroling Squad stamp set by Hurley Create, and I'm going to be creating a 5x7 card today, which is not typical for me. But what I love about these stamp sets is that the images are so big, so that you can use just a single image on an A2 size card, or in this case, like I'm doing now, you can create a larger card and use multiple images, or still even stick to one. It's going to carry your whole card. But like I usually do, I like to create a whole scene. So I'm starting here with my T-square ruler and a pencil just to loosely map out where my images need to be stamped. So it's basically just going to be a window and a door, and that way I can guide myself where I need to stamp my images, and then I'll build up my scene with a Copic Safe pen, which will make it a little more permanent. Not a little more permanent, it will be permanent before I do my coloring. So now that I have that all mapped out, I'm going to go ahead and bring out my MISTI. I've never used these stamps before, so I know I'm probably going to have to stamp them twice. Going to go ahead and stamp these with Blackout ink by Ink on 3 because it is a Copic Safe ink, and I did have to stamp these a couple of times. Probably my error because my ink pad is a brand new ink pad, and I didn't want to press too hard because you know how that is. Sometimes your ink kind of squishes out the sides and things like that. So I'm applying ink very lightly with these images. So once I had my little carolers stamped down, I'm going to go ahead and mask out the opening of the window. So I'm just going to take some Post-it note tape and mask out the top and the bottom portion of where my window will be. And then I'm going to take that Christmas tree that is also part of the stamp set. So this will appear as if the Christmas tree is showing through the window of this house. So again, did stamp this a couple of times with that same Blackout ink, and I just was not doing a great job inking my images up today. But once I did have all of my images, or both of my images I should say, stamped out, I'm going to go ahead and remove that Post-it note tape that is masking out my window there. And then we're going to go in with a Copic Safe pen to not only go over the lines that I've already created with my pencil, but add a little bit more detail so that it actually will look like a house that they're standing in front of. So bringing out my T-square ruler once again, along with an EK Success journaling pen, and just keep in mind that these pens, they dry to the touch immediately, but I guess if you try hard enough, you could probably smear them. They don't dry instantly. So if that makes any sense. So just be careful as you're moving your ruler around that you don't smear the ink that you've already put down. So here I'm creating a frame around my window here. I'll do the same for the door. Also going to create a little deck or porch that these guys are standing on. Ignore my nails. I've tried to do gel manicure myself, and I didn't do that great of a job, and I didn't want to have to take it off. So it's pretty rough looking. They're bumpy and everything like that. That is why people go to the nail salon. So just ignore that. But here is where I realized I wanted to add this wreath to the door, and this is also part of the stamp set. Went ahead and stamped that onto the door, and then I'm going to add some detail to the door itself so that it actually looks like a door. I am going to bring back out my pencil. I was going to use my EK Success journaling pen and then realized I just don't trust myself enough. So I want to kind of measure everything out to make sure that these little rectangles, I don't know what you call them, the part of the door that's kind of indented a little bit, make sure that they're all even with one another. And so I did that with my pencil, and then I will bring out that Copic Safe pen, go over those same lines that I have already measured out, and then kind of create another rectangle that's just a little bit smaller in the center so that it will look like it's indented in once we have the coloring complete. So once my scene was completely drawn out, I'm going to go ahead and erase all of my pencil lines. You will want to make sure that all of your pencil lines are erased before you move on to your coloring, whether you're using Copics or any other alcohol marker. Once you color over any pencil lines, you will not be able to erase them after the fact. So make sure that they are completely gone before moving on to your coloring. So I'm going to start off with the skin tones of these three little boys here, and I'm going to color them all different, but pretty much use the same colors over and over. Just the amounts of them, or I guess you could say, is going to be a little bit different so that they look like they have different skin tones. So as always, I'm going to start off with my lightest color and mapping out my darkest areas. The only real shadows that you're going to see here for these three are going to be either underneath their hair, where their hair is hanging over their face, or if they have a hat on, that will also create a shadow. They have little mittens on, so you're not going to have to color their hands or anything like that. So the only skin that you actually see is their faces and their little necks. So again, for this little middle guy here, just creating a shadow underneath where his hat is hanging over his face, blending that out with the two midtones, and then I'll move back to the lightest color for the highlight. For this third little boy here, he's got a hood up, so he's going to have pretty much a shadow on all sides of his face where this is hanging over his face. So the highlight is going to be straight in the middle of his face. For their hair, I am going to use different hair combinations as well. For this first little guy here, I'm going to use my E50 markers. I typically like to start with my darkest color when I'm coloring hair. So I'm just going to add some shadows to, it's kind of like spiky in the front. So I'm going to add some shading to the base of that little spike. And then behind that, so behind his little spiky bangs there, that would also create a shadow. Blending that out with the E57 a little bit, then the E55, and just reserving just a teeny tiny bit of a highlight for the E53. For this middle guy, you really can only see his little sideburn, so I'm going to go straight in with my black marker for that, not worrying about doing any shading. And for this third little boy here, I'm going to be coloring him a blonde and just adding a little bit of shading with that E15, and then blending that out with the Y26 and the Y23. Next, I wanted to color in the ground that they're standing on. So this would be like a concrete porch. So going in with the C7, I created shadows under each one of those little boys. And then I'm taking out my C1 just to get the paper saturated a little bit towards the back, because that's where I'm going to be adding the shading, just to make my colors blend a little bit easier. Bringing back out that C7 and just adding a little bit of shading to the very back part of the porch. The further away it gets, the darker it'll appear. So this way it'll give it some dimension. I am using a flicking motion here just to make my colors blend a little bit easier. And you'll see throughout this whole thing that I'm kind of flipping my paper back and forth. If you haven't mastered the flick, which I know a lot of people struggle with, and it does take a little bit of practice, try flipping your paper around. Some people are more comfortable flicking away from themselves. Some people are more comfortable flicking towards themselves. Personally, I like to flick away from myself, so you'll see that I'll twist and turn my paper throughout this entire card. And just do whatever works for you, whatever makes it easier, but mainly practice. That's what it's going to take. So I blended that out with the C7, no, the C5, the C3, and then I will go ahead and finish up with the C1 again. Also extending these shadows out as well underneath them, so they're not super dark. I did have to re-ink my marker here just because that was going a little bit dry, and I knew I had this larger area to fill in. So once the porch area was completely covered, I'm going to use my C markers as well to color in the frame of the window as well as the frame of the door. And I'm just going to add a little bit of shading on all four corners of the window, and on the frame of the door, I'm just going to add a little bit of shading towards the door itself and leaving the outer portion more white. And my C5 will be my darkest color. I'll blend that out with the C3 and then the C1, leaving some white space. In order to get rid of those flick lines from the C1, I don't have a lighter cool gray marker, so I just typically go in with my colorless blender very quickly to get rid of the flick line so that it looks like more of a seamless blend. Any white objects are still going to have shadows, so you still want to add a little bit of shading to anything that is white. Now you can see that I have this coloring sped up by quite a bit. I think I have this sped up 4 times because we'd pretty much be spending the entire day together if I kept all of it in at normal speed. So I did leave all of the coloring in here, so you're not going to miss anything as far as color combinations go, but I did have to speed it up. So for the siding of the house, I'm bringing back out my T-square ruler here. I have my W5 marker here, and I'm using the chisel nib just to make sure that my lines are straight. It's harder to do that with the brush nib. And I'm using my grid lines here to make sure that they're equal distance apart. And then once I have the W5 down, which is going to be the darkest color, I'm going to bring in the W3, and I'm just going to add a little bit of shading or extend those areas down a little bit towards the bottom with that W3. And this will basically be the shadow that the siding creates. So the top one would create a shadow on the one underneath it. That's basically all we're creating here. Same thing with the W1, just extending that out a little bit further, but again, leaving a lot of white space here because I want this to appear as if it is a white house, but again, adding that shading. I did have a few areas where I went over the window frame and the door frame, so I just took my colorless blender to get rid of those. Next, we are going to move on to the door, as always, starting off with my lightest color to get the paper saturated and to map out the darkest areas. So I don't know where the shadows should be, to be quite honest with you. So I put them wherever I felt like it. So I'm adding some shading on the inside of the smaller rectangle that we had created. I'm also creating a shadow where the wreath is hanging on the door, including the opening of the wreath, the inside of the wreath where the bow is, that would also create a shadow. And then I am just adding some shading on either side of the door. I figured being we're sticking with a center highlight here for pretty much everything, I'm just going to stick with it with the door. Taking the E57, and I'm just extending those areas out a little bit further, including the shadow that the wreath is creating, not forgetting to add these shadows or shading behind the little boys. So you can see a portion of the door behind the little boys, so you can't forget about that. Just imagine that the whole thing is there. Honestly, nobody will know the difference if you don't add too much shading behind them. They're just going to know it's part of the door. So extending those areas out with the E55, including that outer rectangle there, and then finishing off with the E53 as my lightest color, just getting these colors to blend a little bit, and this will kind of sort of make it look as if it is a wooden door. So next we are going to move on to the Christmas tree here. I'm just going to add some shading with my G28. It's kind of the way the illustration is drawn, it's kind of, the tree is kind of in sections, so I'm just adding a shadow or shading underneath each one of these sections that would cast a shadow on the little section that's underneath it, if that makes sense. Blending that out with the G46, then the G24, and then finishing off with the G21 as my highlight color. Again, using some flicking motions just to make sure that my colors blend nicely, but it is optional. You do not have to use flicking motions each and every time. You will notice that they do blend a little bit easier with it. Now for the outer portion of the, not the outer portion, but I guess the inside of the house, I want it to look like it's dark inside. So I'm going to bring out my B90s, and I'm starting with the B99, and the darkest area is going to be on either side, on either edge of the window. The closer it gets to the Christmas tree, the lighter it'll be, just to make it look as if the Christmas tree is lit up and kind of shining, I guess you could say. So blending that out now with the B97, B95, moving on to the B93, and then I will finish up with the B91, and you'll see that you do get a nice gradient. I love the B90 markers for like a night sky. They really blend nicely together. So next, now that I have that completed, I'm going to go ahead and color the little outfits of these little boys here. I'm going to use the same green combination that I did for the tree. Again, starting off with my lightest color to map out my darkest areas. That way, if you make a mistake and accidentally add a shadow where you don't want it to be, it's easy to cover up because you're using the lightest green. So for the little hat, for the little middle boy there, I'm just adding shading on either side and underneath that little pom-pom there. For their shirts, again, just adding a little bit of shading on either side, and then kind of where they're buttoned or zipped together, including that jacket there, that would kind of create a shadow there. So moving on to the G28, then the G46, G24, and then finishing off again with that G21 as the highlight color. I am also going to use the same combination for the wreath part, the wreath itself. Now I want the wreath to appear as if it has some texture to it, or individual leaves or branches within the wreath itself. So I'm going to go right in with my darkest color and add my shadows. So the only real shadows that we're going to have here is around the bow. So on the top portion of the bow, as well as the ribbons that are kind of hanging down. And then I'm just adding little dots everywhere. With the G28, doing the same thing with the G46 and G24, and then I'll finish off with the G21 and fill in the entire wreath. Most of these dots will kind of spread out and blend together, but it will leave a little bit of texture behind. Next, going to move on to the red combination, and again, just coloring some of their shirts and hats and gloves with this red combination. Starting off with the R22 first, just to get those shadows mapped out. And you want to be very careful with your red combination, any red combination that you use. Reds and pinks and purples are very difficult sometimes because they tend to bleed a little bit more than any other color combination that I've used anyway, and they're nearly impossible to take up. So you want to be super careful that you're staying within the lines and that you're not oversaturating your paper where you are going to risk bleeding, especially when you have the rest of your images colored, because then it's even harder to take up. You can't use a white gel pen, and you can't color over a white gel pen. So I'm just being super careful. Even though I did go out of the lines, it was not bleeding, it just went out of the lines. But we will fix that after, once I finish coloring and have to fix all of my coloring mistakes, because I always make them. So going to finish off their little outfits with some gray markers here. Going to use the C7, C5, and C3 for their pants and their shoes to make it as if they do appear dark gray or black. And then for the white areas, I'm just going to use the C3 and C1 and bring back in that colorless blender to get rid of those flick lines to make these appear white. So it would be his little button-up shirt there, and I guess it would be the fur part of his hood would also appear to be white. So just extending those areas out with the C1, leaving that white space and going in with the colorless blender to make it more of a seamless blend. I did take the R46, which is the darkest mid-tone red, and I'm going to go ahead and fill in the little tongues, I guess, the inside of their mouth, and the little ornaments or the little lights that are hanging on the Christmas tree that is showing through the window. So once all of my coloring was complete, I'm going to go ahead and take my colorless blender to fix up any of the light areas where I went out of the lines. And then I'm using a white gel pen to add some reflections in the window, as well as some reflections on their little hats and outfits, and also to fix up any coloring mistakes that I made with maybe the darker colors, especially where I went over the house portion or like the siding with that C7 marker when I was coloring in the porch area. So in order to make this look as if it is still straight, I am going to go ahead and bring back out my T-square ruler here and my white gel pen just to fix up that little area to make it look as if it is completely straight, because it is not. So once all of the details were complete, I'm going to go ahead and stamp out my sentiment with Versafine Onyx Black ink right there on that porch area. That's pretty much the only area that I have left myself to stamp my sentiment. And there's a couple music notes that are part of the stamp set as well, so I figured I would stamp a couple of those around the sentiment as well. I added a little bit of shimmer to some random areas around the card with a Nuvo Aqua shimmer pen. I added some to the hats and some to the jackets and gloves and the ribbon on, or the bow on the wreath. Last, I finished off the card using some Enamel Accents by Ranger, just for the little ornaments or the little lights that are on the tree, just to give a little bit of dimension and so that you could see that red a little bit better. But that is it. That is the card for today, guys. I will leave all of the supplies listed below. Thank you guys so much for stopping by and have a great day. Bye.